that I learned in my skill development is every potter has and will develop your own technique and style. The way I do it isn't the only way. The way Miss Michaud does it isn't the only way. You're going to find a style, and I'll talk a little bit about some subtle differences, but there is a kind of an overwhelming similar concept with all of these steps. Miss Michaud has some of the clay set up and ready. I can't emphasize enough, start with it in a circle. I've seen students have it be triangular and blobby, and they're kind of chasing it all over. The more you can get this in a nice round circle, find the pedal somewhere.
Yeah, I just kept him
Oh,
underneath.
that's her. Start with it in a nice circle. You're going to need to be a little firm with it, okay? The idea and kind of the visual example, if I stand here, I'm going to ask you to help me for a second.
Okay.
I just want you to kind of just give me a little bit of a, not a punch, but just a little bit of a push here. Okay, so notice, okay, you're really strong, I mean, by the way, so, but get the idea, okay, I was pretty weak with that, okay? Now, do that same idea. Okay, you can see I had a little bit more resistance. I think that's the biggest thing that potters have in the beginning is they get a little soft, okay? The clay's pushing. You're going to have a little bit of strength. It's not like crazy power, but you've got to be a little resistant. So when that clay's going to push you back, you just need to push and hold. So keep in mind that idea of push and hold. It doesn't require necessarily bicep muscles, but it requires a little bit of a control. So if that analogy gives you a sense, if you're doing this and you're just giving all the time, you're going to be like, I hate this is really frustrating. But if you understand that concept, if I come and I give you a little push, okay, that's a little soft. Now, restance, okay, now, yeah, so now you're holding a little bit of a resistance to that. That's what you're going to have to do when throwing. I always, just a little, okay, 2 little fingers dipped in, and I kind of throw that in there. That helps. I'm also going to get the, hang on, sorry. Make sure that,
Yes.
if these aren't centered, I would encourage you to just make sure that they are centered. So as you can see now, the wheel is pretty much in the middle. Understand the pedal. It's like driving a car. Pedal to the metal is going to be the fastest, okay? All the way down is off, and so you can find a little bit of a groove. So it's multiple moving parts. I've got a little bit of water. You never want to have your hands wet. That's another mistake potters make, is sloppy and they throw it on and now it's sliding all over. You want this fairly, I would say, dry, even though the clay is moist. So throwing clay, the idea of throwing it onto the middle, you don't have to necessarily throw it, but you want to smack it down, okay? So you want and need that to stick. You notice I'm going to hand pack this a little bit. My hands are always going to be kind of working side by side to support. I just find tends to work a little easier if you approach it that way. Water is your friend when it comes to throwing. If it starts getting sticky, you need to add more water. Now the other concept is here, very soft. You can see I'm slopping around, okay, I can't do anything with it. Envision a line from your elbow straight through the middle of your wrist and straight through the middle of your piece of pottery, okay? That's the concept. That's going to allow you to put some force into there, but not push it off the wheel. So there's a point at which you stop once your hand stops doing this. If you push to a point where it just locks in, the other mistake potters make is they make the wheel go too slow. It doesn't have to go as fast as possible, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply bring my elbows in. I have no strength here, okay? You don't see football players doing this. You see football players do this because it gives the most control and strength. You also don't see me throwing pottery like this either. It's a pretty intense process. So you're going to see me get in a stance that allows me to have some control. Elbow is in. Okay, weak. I'm applying a little pressure. Now I'm also applying some pressure down on the wheel head because I don't want the volcano effect. You're going to see me add lots of water from time to time. So I'm just applying a little bit of pressure, and you can kind of see that go up. Now, for the demonstration, I'm trying to show you bits and pieces. When you're actually throwing, you're going to apply pressure here, and with your left hand, you're going to apply pressure down. That combination of I'm holding here, and I'm going to push down here, allows you to center that process. So I'm holding on the outside and I'm pushing down here until it becomes one centered piece. So again, I'm here, line from my elbow, out my wrist, through the middle. Okay, so notice I'm kind of curving here. I'm not pushing out here, I'm pushing here. I'm kind of leaning in a little bit, and then my other hand here is going to push down in order to get that to be centered. I promise you, it looks easier than it is. Okay, I can't emphasize, you're going to do it the first time. I don't get it, this is stupid. Just give it some time, understand those basic concepts, and it will come. From there, you're going to make just a little indentation. I always kind of think of a butterfly. Okay, make a little indentation to start with. If your thumb is chasing itself, okay, it means that you're off center, and then you just recenter this process and clean that up. If it's right in the middle, okay, just a little indentation, if it's right in the middle, then you can move on to the opening portion. Notice I don't smush it all down. I kind of rotate my thumb up, and that will go down to the bottom. Now, in the beginning, it's really tough to know how deep you are. So I always say test by just dropping your index finger in and putting a T across. Okay, that gives you your depth gauge, and then you simply go to the outside here, and a little bit of my fingernail, I can see where that groove is, and I probably have about a half of an inch on the bottom, and that's what you want. You don't want to get it too thin. If you break through, you're best scrape it off and start over as much as you like. No, I spent 15 minutes. The more you practice this, the better you get, the faster it's going to go. So we center, we open. We're then going to widen. Potters do this in different ways. Some potters like to push away. That's kind of how I had trained and how I like to do that. Some will kind of get just an index finger in and they'll pull towards themselves. That's okay as well. But you need to widen it to get multiple fingers in there, because initially you just have your thumb. Now you had said a bowl is what we're going to be looking for. So with a bowl, we don't need a real flat bottom, but instead we just need that center point, and then we're going to kind of widen this out. So I'm simply supporting on the outside, and I'm simply rocking my hand out, and that's going to start to slowly widen this. How pottery works is the faster the wheel, the faster I can move my hands. It's not about speed, but it is about control. You don't, please, and again, learning is, you're going to be doing this, you don't want to be throwing like this. One, you're going to have to move your hand at such a slow speed that you're not going to be able to control your movements. And you're also, this is where pottery becomes uneven. If I can get, it's not as fast as it can go, but if I can get that wheel going at a decent pace, now I can start to pull and move that piece of pottery around. Now what I'm doing is I always start at the bottom, okay, bottom of the bowl, bottom of the wheel head, and I'm simply going to pinch just a little bit. At that point, I'm simply going to pull without my fingers separating. So I'm going to find a width, and I keep that width the same all the way through. And so this concept or idea of pulling pottery, you'll also notice I'm supporting on the outside, I'm supporting on the inside. I keep my elbows in because this is the strength part. I'm not here. and I'm throwing at one point. The great thing about a wheel is it keeps spinning the clay back into you. So never throw here. You're going to confuse the poor clay, because what's going to happen is the clay is going to go, oh, I'm going to listen to this hand. No, I'm going to listen to this hand. And then everything starts to go all funky. So you start at one point and simply move your hands very slowly. Now, as we get this carrying out, you'll notice I don't want that centrifugal force to carry and rip my piece. Now at this point you can start to slow that down. My hand motion slows down as well. If I need to close this a little bit, you can do this from the bottom up. So what I'm doing is I'm simply holding and I just raise this a little bit, and I can bring that clay form back in. Again, takes practice. You never force it too much, but you can change the shape. You can change how that's going to look. You want those walls to be as even as possible, and the rim to be as even as possible. And Miss Michaud, as I was walking in, was talking about the needle tool. Notice how I'm kind of hanging on to it. I hang on to one hand. I'm going to kind of use my thumb on the other hand, and I'm going to use it kind of as a pivot point, and the clay is going to be in between. So clay is going to be on the edge of the needle, and I'm going to then touch my finger on the inside, and that will cut off the rim. Now for this, I'm going to keep my foot on the pedal. I can slow that down a little bit so you can see my index finger is on the inside, needle's on the outside. I'm resting things down. I start a little line. If you can see that line show, I just kind of keep pushing through a little bit at a time. Needle's now touching my finger. I raise that up, and the rim is now perfectly level. And so as potters, you always want to have a nice clean rim to that process. I also don't want any sharp points, because glaze doesn't stick very well, and if you're going to use it as a mug or something to drink from, you never want that to be sharp. So I'm going to control the pressure, but I'm simply going to round that off a little bit. I might use the sponge to help kind of smooth that out. I also don't want a swimming pool of water on the bottom of my bowl. That's going to weaken the clay because it absorbs water. So keep the bottom of your bowl or cylinder or whatever piece that you're making fairly clear of water, but you're going to need water on the walls in order to throw. So that is the shaping part. So we've centered, we've opened, we've widened, we've pulled, and now we've kind of, this would be what we call finishing, or kind of the cleaning up of the piece. With the modeling tool, before I take this off the wheel, I don't want that little volcano edge on there. I want to clean that up a little bit. I need to hang on to this pretty strong. The clay's going to want to pull it, and you don't want it to rip. So I'm hanging on pretty strong, and just at a slight angle, I'm just going to go and clean up that little bit of an edge. I then flip it over with the flat side, and I'm removing that excess clay. What that does is that's going to allow me to cut my piece of pottery off the wheel. Even if you've created a piece and it's like, you know what, I'm just going to let it sit for a while and harden, you have to cut it off the wheel, or it will stick to the wheel head, and as it shrinks, it will kind of crack and pull itself apart. Hang on to this relatively tight. You don't want it loose, or it will cut into the bottom. Little water on the bottom helps add a little bit of moisture. Again, pulling relatively tight. You can kind of see into my skin that it just pulls. Now, be careful, it's wire, it can cut you. So be sensitive to how hard you pull. Different potters work, and you can see how, okay, I want to make sure my wheel is on, and I keep that tight all the way through. Now you can see, because of the water, much like an ice skate or anything else, okay, it's now off the wheel head. It could sit there. We also have lifters, okay, and for this piece, actually, I want to just show something else. But at this point, you could lift this off. Now, something that you want to get used to and accustomed to is if you make a mistake, learn from it. Don't get mad, this is stupid. Instead, if you make a mistake, cut it in half. Learn from what you're creating. Okay, so here you can see that we've got fairly even walls coming up the edge. We've got a little thicker down at the bottom, and this is a point at which we can't really show how to trim a bowl, but we will, or Miss Michaud will, as these dry out and as you get some pieces to trim. But this is where you'll actually remove afterwards some of the material on the bottom, and it will both lighten but also keep that wall thickness a little bit more even. So that gives you at least a little bit of an idea. I would recommend in the beginning, one other thing is make sure that you always end with a clean wheel head. So how are we doing for time? Does anyone? 24? Okay, so, and there's a small group?
Yes.
Okay, so it's almost done?
That's it, yeah.
Okay, what I would recommend is start out, don't throw anything more than your fist. So you make a fist and say, okay, that's about the size. Potters like the idea, oh, I'm gonna start with this huge piece. It takes a lot of control, it takes a lot of practice. So start with the size of your fist. Once you've gained some confidence, then you can start getting bigger. But that's a good size because you can manipulate that with your hand. All right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions at this point? And certainly Ms. Michaud can answer them, or I as well. So.